talk about it on J-Air. And, I mean, this is entertaining, absolutely. So, well, Elvis lives, but not quite. Really, Baz Luhrmann is the one who's breathed new life into the legend and the aura surrounding the consummate performer, the best-selling solo recording artist of all time. I don't actually have the numbers. Does anybody have the numbers of records he's actually sold? Anybody know? I'd be curious. Maybe you can Google it while we're talking. Anyway,
I thought it was something like nearly 300 million or something like that.
Something like that.
Wow. I mean, and
had more top tens in America than anyone else too.
And of course, a movie like this will just catapult the sales of records. Having said that, it's the one thing that we've got to say off the top. I mean, has anybody heard of Austin Butler before? Have we seen him in a movie before?
No, he had a role.
The Dead Died. Or something.
I'm sorry?
With, Bill Murray in that a couple of years ago.
Oh, okay.
And he was in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
In Hollywood as well, yes.
Ah, very good.
He played one of Manson's gang.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Well, this is a movie that unfolds as a hero and villain story. And the hero is obviously Presley, played by Butler, who's this artist with prodigious talent. And the villain is his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, played by Tom Hanks. This would have to be the sleaziest role that Tom Hanks has played, and he's put on a fat suit just for the occasion. And the tale unfolds as Parker is lying on his deathbed. He's reflecting on what went down, rejecting suggestions he was responsible for the demise of the king. Instead, the Colonel maintains he made Elvis and theirs was a true partnership. And we learn that Parker was what's called a snowman, who used every trick in the book to get others to see things his way. And he did a really good job of that to a point, until Elvis wanted to spread his wings, and then the Colonel pushed back. Even though the pair did work their way through some of those unpleasantries, that relationship was bound to end badly. And along the way, of course, Elvis met and married Priscilla, played by Olivia de Jonge, who was the daughter of a US military officer. Mind you, I looked up the background, and apparently her father died at a young age and then the mother remarried. So that was Priscilla's story, if what I read is true. Elvis, the picture, details the highs and lows of the singer and movie star's career. And it also highlights the gambling addiction that saw Colonel Tom Parker push Presley in a direction that Presley did not want to go. And of course, we see the influence of African-American entertainers and gospel singers in the emergence of Elvis as a serious force in the music business. And what would a movie about Presley be without the adulation of fawning women everywhere? So Baz Luhrmann is one of 4 with writing credits here, alongside Sam Bromwell, or Bromell rather, Craig Pearce, who was working with him on The Great Gatsby, and Jeremy Donner. So it's not what I'd call a traditional biopic. It has Luhrmann's creative flair all over it. And another way of saying that is that the movie's full of showmanship in realising elements of the life of the ultimate showman. So it's glossy, it's gaudy, visually it's stunning, and the cinematographer is Mandy Walker, who was involved in Mulan. So, production values are magnificent. What do you reckon? Do you like it, or do you not like it? And let's start with Jacqui.
Okay, loved it.
Yeah?
Fantastic. What a film. This is a film that's up there with the best to remember from Baz Luhrmann. But when we say Baz Luhrmann, he has worked so tightly with Austin Butler, and he's made sure this wasn't going to go ahead without Austin Butler totally rocking it, which is absolutely what he does. And he can sing Elvis. He's a really super talented young guy, 30 years old, and sing, do the moves, do everything. In fact, he's almost so close to looking like a young Elvis. It's not a leap to believe you're really watching him.
Really?
I just thought
did
he
you
was...
think that, Jacqui? Did you? I mean, Greg, I didn't actually...
That's why I'm saying it. Yeah, truly.
Greg, I didn't actually
Amazing.
see that. Did you? I'm just curious.
You know,
He doesn't really look a lot like Elvis, but I thought he captured the essence of him, his moves, his voice even, especially on the live scenes when he's performing on stage. I thought he caught the moves, the looks, and that perfectly.
Yeah, I do, but Jacqui, the reason I asked that of Greg is I didn't think initially he looked like Elvis at all.
For a young Elvis, it's a bit hard to say, but he portrayed him from the age of 17 to 42, so he did a good job, I thought.
Yeah, you did.
And he keeps the mannerisms, Alex, and the way he glances up. I just thought he captured the look of the Elvis that we know as the entertainer really, really well.
I agree. I totally agree. What about, did you agree with me about the cinematography and the production values? I mean, Catherine Martin.
Amazing. I mean, it kicks off like bang, right in your face, right up front. And you wouldn't know you were on the Gold Coast. It really feels, very much embedded in the Las Vegas and the whole scene over there. So, I mean, the sets and the indoors and outdoors, everything, the way it zooms in and out and the colour and the frenetic pace and it really is very full on, which is part of, I think, the feeling of the energy of the guy and the way that he was, the way that he spent his life, and the rise and fall and the personal story and the story that was seen by the audience. It captures all of that, I think.
It does. I mean, it's interesting you talk about the Gold Coast. I would have thought it's the best location you could possibly shoot if you don't shoot it in Las Vegas, because it is glossy and gaudy there too, huh? So.
Yes, but I don't think they were using. I don't know what they were using of the buildings. I don't think they were using Gold Coast buildings as.
No, look, and I talked about Catherine Martin. Karen Murphy was the other one involved in this in terms of the production side of things, and of course Catherine Martin, who's won 4 Oscars. She was also responsible for the costuming, and boy, the costuming was impressive. I mean, have you got many of those in your wardrobe, Peter?
I don't think so, although I should have another look.
You are lacking. Your life is not complete. I actually want to see you in a onesie. Just one of those Elvis onesies. Can you please come to a media screening wearing one of those?
Wear a onesie. Alex, I think there's a support group for you about that wish that you have.
I reckon. Can you imagine? Look, I reckon if we put a petition together and we get some more signatures online. Would you do it for us, Peter? This is only live. It's on air. You can tell us the truth. Come on. If we raise enough signatures, would you do it?
The horror. No. Alex, would you like me to talk about the film instead?
That's the Jewish dance, Peter. The horror.
The horror. Thank you very much. Yes. Thank you.
Yes. Keep going. By all means, have your say, Peter, because I can bet money on the fact that you're going to find something to criticise, correct?
Baz Luhrmann is a really interesting filmmaker.
Sorry, answer my question. Have you got something to criticise Elvis for?
Can you wait for my review? I don't like being preempted sometimes.
Oh, no, hang on. I'm waiting with bad and bated breath.
And with that support group in tow, I suppose. Okay. Look, Baz Luhrmann has made some very interesting films because he uses a very frenetic sort of style of filmmaking, and he takes simple stories and turns them into something overblown but also entertaining. And he did that with Romeo and Juliet. He did that with Moulin Rouge. Now I think he's come a cropper, because if you look at the way he's treated Elvis Presley, the film actually is not so much about Elvis Presley, but about Colonel Tom Parker, who was not a colonel, who was not called Tom, who was not called Parker. He's a Dutch immigrant to America. And what this film does is focuses much more on Parker's manipulation of Presley. The film is very much bloated and excessive in its style, and apart from being not a particularly good biopic of Presley, because we really don't learn much new in this film that we didn't already know, the frenetic editing, and there are some nods to some politics and black entertainers and so on, which seem quite spurious, but obviously are very effective for Luhrmann to use. I don't think say anything much about Presley at all. I still have fond memories of John Carpenter's telemovie of 1979 called Elvis, where Kurt Russell did a pretty good job in playing Elvis, but that was a much more emotionally grounded and much more compelling look, also in 2.5 hours, of Elvis Presley. Overall, I was numbed by this film. I thought, how over the top and how ridiculous can Lerman really take this story? And what was so dispiriting for me is that where there are some emotional moments, they are thrown away very quickly so that we go back to Colonel Tom Parker as the manipulator. I was not impressed at all by this film, and I think the use of Presley's music was also not handled particularly well as the representation of the films that Elvis Presley was in. He was in 31 films, and they dismiss his film career very, very quickly, including his first film, Jailhouse Rock. So there are too many missteps and too much frenetic editing and glossing over some of the other aspects of Elvis Presley's life. It's a bloated biopic, and I don't think it works at all.
Wow. Have you loved any of Baz Luhrmann's work?
Yes, I thought he did a good job with Moulin Rouge and with Romeo and Juliet, and of course Strictly Ballroom, because he was able to take simple stories and use that frenetic energy to really power the story and make it entertaining. But it's when you have a biopic of a real person like Elvis Presley, you need to do something more with it, and I don't think he did that at all.
Well, there's no doubt that some events that would likely be highlighted by another director, given short shrift here. For example, Elvis quickly goes from courting Priscilla in one scene to marriage and a baby, and that's just another example of what you've just talked about with regards to the 31 movies. And quite correct in terms of your assessment, a great deal more attention is paid to the Colonel's skullduggery. But, I mean, nowhere is it written that you have to make a biopic in a certain way. I agree that we didn't learn a great deal more, if anything, about Elvis. I mean, at 2 hours 39 minutes, we didn't really dig deeply into Elvis's psyche. We got a feel for what he was about, Dave, and that doesn't mean that that's bad. And that's where I differ from you, Peter. I don't think that's just because it's not what you may have wanted, it doesn't mean that it isn't just as effective. What do you reckon, Dave?
Yeah, I think we have to remember that the screenplay is written from the eyes of Parker, and therefore things are going to be slanted and look a little differently to what we know of the Elvis story. Someone famously said once, if you have a car accident and you have 4 people witness the car accident, it is likely that all 4 people will tell you a different story of what's happened, because everybody sees things differently. For Parker, he saw himself as a little bit of a hero that plucked this kid out of a small town and made him a star. He wasn't interested in Elvis's private life and any of that stuff. In fact, he probably made it a lot worse. And I think that's one of the things we need to remember when we're watching this film. It's basically Elvis's life told through the stories that Parker told. And there's even, if you go through and have a look at some of the stuff that's come out over the last few years, some of the things that are in this movie have been debunked as being false because Parker made them up about Elvis. So it's an interesting film from that sense.
Like what, Dave? What's been made up?
Just some of the stuff about Elvis's younger days. When Parker gave evidence at different points when he was questioned about his treatment of Elvis, some of the stories that he told about Elvis's younger days were debunked by people that were around at that time. So it is.
A question for you, Peter. I think Dave's explained it very well, that this was Elvis from Colonel Parker's perspective, notwithstanding that he wasn't a colonel and, all of that stuff. So does that give you any wriggle room that, you're expecting a form of biopic about Elvis, but this, maybe the name is misleading. It's not in the sense that it's obviously about Elvis through his eyes, though. So, I mean, does that give you any solace or not really?
Not at all, because everything is perspective and perception. And if you look at an artwork, if you look at a piece of film, whatever, you're going to interpret it and understand it and make sense of it in different ways. And the way I saw the film Elvis is that it was a poor interpretation of a major performer, and it was really the focus being on Tom Parker and his, as Dave has said, spurious recall of some incidents and events, and I think that is somewhat misleading. I mean, I know it's not a documentary, and that's quite different, but nevertheless, as a drama, I don't think it was particularly effective at all.
Wow. I mean,
so, Peter, do you think it should have been through no one's eyes? So not even through Elvis's? So it should have been, like, really neutral?
Possibly.
Because I actually thought it was a fantastic way to approach it and create a different view of Elvis's life.
Mm.
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it, and that's fine. But I didn't see it that way, and I really thought it was just a bloated piece of excess cinema.
But I mean, okay. All joking aside, it's fascinating that this whole conversation, because we started talking about football. My bias towards Essendon, etc., and I look at everything through rose-coloured glasses. As you described, everybody has their own view. Like you get four people attending to something, and they've got their own perception. And is that perception reality, or is that perception? Well, that's an interesting argument in and of itself. So, I mean, I agree with Jacqui that this one surprised me in as much as, okay, sure, I would have liked to learn something about Elvis I didn't know. I agreed. But beyond that, it became, as I said, a hero and villain story. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with viewing it in that way. And I went in there not knowing what to expect other than I'd seen the trailer several times. But I thought, hang on, Baz Luhrmann is noted for his gloss. That's what he does. I mean, it's not going to be an in-depth anything. It's going to be something that deals with the man in the way that Baz Luhrmann deals with the man. And that's what he did, was it not, Dave?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one because, it's got the typical Baz Luhrmann stamp all over it. In fact, I described a lot of the camera shots as the similar camera shots as what he used with Moulin Rouge when he was flashing through the Paris streets and stuff like that. But I think some people are going to learn things about Elvis from this film, especially the younger generation, because for the younger generation, Elvis, as someone said to me the other day at Oz Comic Con, we were talking about the film because, of course, the lead actor made his name, first of all, in a DC Comics series called Arrow, and we were talking to some of the younger people there, and I said, are you interested in seeing Elvis? And they said, oh yeah, we want to see it because of Butler, because of what he has in the DC universe. And I said, do you know much about Elvis? And they said, the fat guy that died on a toilet. That's all they knew about him, and all they knew was that that's a guy that their parents listened to. So for them going along and watching this film, they're going to learn about the politics and stuff that happened early on in Elvis's life, and they're probably going to see a completely different side to people our ages who grew up watching documentaries and seeing things about Elvis all the time.
Did you like
that's so sad, Dave. Why didn't their parents teach them all about him? Why were they brought up living under a rock?
I think for a lot of kids, Elvis was daggy. I know even for when I was a teenager, if like my dad listened to a wide variety of music, and I would stay if he was listening to AC/DC or something like that. But once Elvis came on, I left the room, not because I didn't like the music, but just...
You left the building, Dave.
Yeah, he was just... He's kind of considered a daggy kind of artist to a lot of... probably the last two generations. So...
Did you like the movie, Dave?
Great. Never knew that.
Yeah. I really liked the movie. I love the fact that Luhrmann didn't go down the typical telemovie kind of style of storytelling. I think the acting saves the film, though. If you said to me, is this an award-winning screenplay, I'd probably say no. But I thought the acting really saved this film.
Now, is there a cartoon quality to it as far as you're concerned, Greg? I'm talking cartoon in terms of Tom Parker being sort of inflated, if you like, blown up as a caricature almost.
Tom Hanks gives one of the strangest performances of the year, I think, as Colonel Tom Parker, with the accent, the fat suit and everything here. But I with Peter, the Kurt Russell interpretation from John Carpenter is probably the definitive Elvis. But that's for our generation. The younger generation, as Dave pointed out, will probably be wrapped in this one here. I like the recreation of the music. The lip syncing is fantastic there because they use a lot of Elvis's music, but Austin Butler does some of the singing, particularly in the live sequences there. And I actually thought Baz Luhrmann's flashy direction, at the start it's all over the place and it takes a while to settle down, but once you got into the film, I thought his direction was good there. And one sequence I really liked was when Elvis is singing Suspicious Minds and Colonel Parker is pressuring the guy who runs the International Hotel to sign this massive contract, 10 years for Elvis there, to lock him into this contract there. And I thought that made the point that you didn't trust Colonel Parker's failure to spit there. But it gives a few insights into some of the hold that Colonel Parker had over Elvis there. You can see him as a sort of Machiavellian-like character there, who is more interested in the money he could make off Elvis than Elvis as a person.
Yeah, and I mean, this is what I'm saying. It was single-dimensional in that regard, that it was just a question of piling more nastiness on top of more nastiness, and this is why it was sort of like something that you might see in a kid's cartoon. But it was developed from there to an extent by the other accoutrements, if you like, the costuming and production values, etc., etc. And I mean, look, I think I really thought it was a great offering for what it was. I mean, it's got Luhrmann's trademark pizzazz. There's nothing wrong with that. The only question I suppose I had about it, did it need to be 2 hours 39 minutes long? That I mean, I think it could have done with 15, 20 minutes off it, and it would have been fine. I just don't know. What's your thought about that, Dave?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, it wasn't one of those movies where I sat there and felt like it dragged. So I guess that's okay. But
that's a good sign. No, that's good. And what about you, Greg?
Look, I don't know what you'd cut out there. I spent a lot of time on the music, particularly the Las Vegas era, which is sort of that famous part of Elvis's career in the 60s there, and the early 70s there. I don't see what they could have cut out. You had to get a bit of the younger Elvis. You had to get that transition, his middle career there, the films he made in Hollywood, the music, and the late Las Vegas period where he made his reputation. I don't know what they could have cut out. And like Dave, I weren't really conscious of it dragging that much. It was sort of Luhrmann's fast-paced direction that kept it going.
Well, as far as you're concerned, Peter, they could have saved 2 hours 39 minutes, correct?
Possibly, yes, but a film is not a function of its running time, but of the screenplay, and I think that's where the initial problem lies, that I think they tried to either cram too much into the script, or they went off into tangents which were not particularly helpful in terms of really understanding who Elvis was, even though the title of the film is Elvis.
But perhaps, Jacqui, what they should have done is broken it up like Star Wars and had 6 parts.
I thought it was fine just as it was, actually. I didn't mind the tangents, and I think the tangents were probably a product of seeing it from, viewed through Parker's eyes rather than, and finding out a lot more about him, although most of it, again, we knew about him, or at least, there were rumours, but also that we found out about him. But I think seeing it from his point of view gave a different perspective on it, and we had to go through that. And as Peter said, there wasn't a lot done on his film work, not a lot of time spent on that, and I think the end of Elvis's life was also rushed through quite a bit. So I really enjoyed the younger years and a lot of time spent on the singing and the concerts, and which was what we wanted to see anyway, really.
Well, the music, the mix of the real Elvis and Austin Butler, very much, shall we say, on song. Look, the performance of Butler in the lead, I mean, he really manages to capture, as Jacqui and Greg have said, the look and feel of Elvis, and I thought Hanks was impressive as this sleazy manipulator extraordinaire, even though it's a very different role for him. And I thought, even though she didn't have much to do or had a much smaller role, DeJong maintained a quiet dignity as Priscilla. So with all of that, it starts on Thursday. It's 2 hours 39 minutes in duration. It's called Elvis. It's rated M. It's the film by Baz Luhrmann and his wife and others, of course, Catherine Martin being his real-life partner. What shall we give it out of 10? And we'll go shortest to tallest. So, Peter Krausz, I shudder, but go for it.
Well, it's a film that, can be looked at in a number of different ways, and there's no right or wrong way. There's always an orthodoxy assumption that everyone falls into line with a particular view of a particular film, and I don't think that should be the case. So, with the disappointments that I faced with this film, I can only muster 5 out of 10.
Oh, boy. I mean, can he go, Jacqui, can I stick him in the bad boys corner? Can I please?
Oh, wow.
It's just, yeah, okay. So now I'm going to try and guess who gave it the second highest score. I'll go Greg.
As a star-making performance from Austin Butler, I like the music and the recreation of the costumes in the Las Vegas era there as well. There are a few reservations here, but 7 to 7.5 for me.
Okay. I will go Dave next.
Well, I'm looking forward to the Star Wars Elvis film that you talked about. I'm guessing it'll be called The Empire Jives Back. So I'm going to give it 8 out of 10.
Very good. I'm also giving it 8. So far, I've picked us all. Jacqui, you can top us off.
Yeah, I will, because I loved it. I didn't find a dull moment through 2 hours, 39 minutes. It was energetic and it was entertainment.
Yes.
Might not have been a biopic, but it was entertainment. I really enjoyed it, and I gave it 9 out of 10.
Oh,
Yay!
Well, ring the bell. Sensational. Okay.
I think it'll be generally a really popular film.
I mean, in terms of, if you look at scores from IMDb and elsewhere, it's nowhere near the 9 out of 10. But, that takes into consideration everybody's individual viewpoint. But no, I mean, I don't think I've seen too many reviews which are down to 5. So, yeah, we've got a diversity of opinions here, and Peter can't help it if he's wrong. That's okay. We excuse you, Peter. That's fine.
You are excused, Alex.
All is forgiven. Now, let's talk.